So please have out your mitosis guided notes in front of you. What we're going to do now is start the beginning of our unit. You're going to do mitosis together with me in this video and fill out the first page of your notes. And then afterwards, you're going to start cell cycle on your own using your textbook. This is something we'll spend next class kind of debriefing. So to give you an overview of this unit in general, we just did cell structure. So we talked about the parts of a cell, how do they work together to make the cell stay alive. But at this point, we're still at the single cell level. What we're going to do now is talk about how we get sort of more complex organisms. So either more unicellular organisms in the case of how our bacteria are going to divide, or in the case of multicellular organisms, how we are going to replace certain cells, and then also how we're going to make specialized cells called sex cells for a type of reproduction known as sexual reproduction. So up here we have an overview. We have the cell cycle. So we're going to look at the different parts of the life of a cell. Next, we're going to look at mitosis, so that's looking at how new body cells are formed. And then the third one we'll have is meiosis. So this is a specialized type of cell division that occurs in sexually reproducing organisms to make cells called sex cells for reproducing. First question I want to ask you guys, though, is how many cells do you think there are in the human body? So this is a rough estimate, but because obviously it's going to depend on how big a person is, how old they are, all sorts of things like that. But roughly estimates put it around 37 trillion. So we're talking about in the trillions with a T. So the question that we are going to start with and kind of address today is how do we get from this first cell that we see over on the right-hand side? So it's just one cell. And this is what everyone looked like about 16 to 20 hours after insemination. So when your sperm and egg cell combine and you're just one cell. How do we get from there to 37 trillion? And the answer to that, shockingly, is mitosis. And so what we are going to do is talk about what mitosis is. How do our body cells divide to make more cells? So mitosis is cell division in somatic cells. So somatic is a vocab term you're going to come across in this unit. There are two types of cells in your body. There's somatic cells and there's sex cells. So somatic cells are ones that are not going to be used for sexual reproduction. These are cells that, my memory trick here, mitosis happens in mitoses. So your toes being a part of your body would, to make more skin cells for your toes, more nails cells for your nails. Any of those types of cells, if they go to divide, they're going to do it through mitosis because they are somatic cells or body cells. So you'll notice that there's a number in parentheses. This corresponds to the number in your notes. The thing you should be recording is also in red, so make sure you're kind of keeping up as we go through. And if you miss anything, just rewind. So mitosis is a type of asexual reproduction because the parent cell is genetically identical to the offspring. So we're going to look at this when we're going to actually model it in class a little bit later, where we'll look at how the DNA inside the parent cell copies itself and then divides itself into two genetically identical daughter cells. And we call the cells that are produced through mitosis or meiosis daughter cells. And the one, it's not called the mother cell, it's called the parent cell. So it's going to be genetically identical. So it's a type of asexual reproduction. Bacteria. Bacteria are also going to use a form of asexual reproduction to make their offspring. And so this will be asexual reproduction. You're going to start with one bacterial cell. You're going to end with two genetically identical daughter cells, but we don't call it mitosis when it's being done by bacteria reproduce. We call it binary fission. Now, this word binary fission is actually a word that if we know the parts, it actually is exactly what it sounds like. So binary, if you're familiar with the coding language, it's a series of zeros and ones because binary means two. And fission, unlike maybe if you're familiar with the nuclear forms, nuclear fission, nuclear fusion. So fission means to break apart. So binary fission literally means break apart into two. So when a bacteria undergoes binary fission, one parent bacteria forms two genetically identical daughter bacteria. We kind of glossed over this in number 3 too. We should be picking up, if we go back to number 3, that I keep saying the number of daughter cells that we're going to produce in mitosis is what? Good, so hopefully we were listening, paying attention. So it is 2. Mitosis is going to make 2 daughter cells. So as far as why cells need to divide, so the first one we are going to take a look at in a little bit of presentation. So the first reason that some organisms will undergo mitosis is for regeneration. So I wrote not in humans, and I want to clarify that a little bit. So humans do some partial regeneration. For example, you can do a partial transplant of a liver, and the liver will regenerate or heal itself. So a person that might have a diseased liver can take a transplant of a part of another person's, and the liver will regrow from what was transplanted. However, humans do not do regeneration on the same scale as a lot of other organisms. So for example, starfish and planarians. And the guy we're going to look at here are leopard gecko. So this is super quick. It's about 50 seconds, but it's a good illustration. So if we take a look over here at his tail, so lizards, as a defense mechanism, have the ability to drop their tail. And it's almost like a sacrifice to a predator. And it says, instead of eating my head, here I'm going to distract you with this part of my tail that I can then regrow. And one of the cool things we can kind of look at while this video is playing is if you pay attention to the shape of the tail and the shape of the head, we see another sort of mimicry here that's a great evolutionary tactic for this leopard gecko. So what is actually happening is because the head and the tail are the same shape, it's another confusing mechanism for predators. The predators could accidentally sort of attack the tail. So regeneration would be due to mitosis. That is something that is going to cause regrowth. Oh, skip that one for now. And that one. So now if we look at number 5 in your notes, why do somatic cells need to divide? Regeneration is kind of a cool one, not done in humans though. But if we take a look at why human cells are going to divide, there's 3 basic reasons. So the first one we started out with my question, how do we get from 1 cell to approximately 37 trillion? And that's growth and development. So organisms physically get larger and they get more complex through mitosis. So cells dividing to make other cells, and then those daughter cells being specialized to do complex jobs. Like in humans, nerve cells are going to send messages, cardiac cells are going to contract to make your heart beat, special jobs. The second reason is repair. So we notice that there's a nice paper cut in the middle, ouchie. So what happens when you damage one of your cells is that it's going to send the area around it will send a bunch of messages to cells around it saying, we have a gap here, we have a problem, and those cells are going to be sort of encouraged to undergo mitosis, divide and repair the damaged area. So that's another reason cells will undergo mitosis. And the last one, and this is closely related to repair, is replacement. We're going to look in the cell cycle about how cells have kind of an end date. They do not live forever. You do not have cells. You have some cells that are going to be in your lifetime, but cells do not have the ability to continue going on and on. They eventually are going to die, and in that case, they need to be replaced. The highest rate of replacement that we find in the human body is your skin cells. Your skin cells are constantly sloughing off your body, and then underneath you have a layer of your skin called the dermis that is producing through mitosis brand new cells to replace the ones we're losing constantly. We skipped that one. Oh, there we go. There we go. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is DNA. And the reason that we're talking about DNA is because truly when we sort of look at modeling mitosis and meiosis, what we're going to spend the vast majority of our time doing is looking at what's happening to the DNA in each stage. Now, the reason for this is that your DNA is the molecule that encodes all the instructions for a cell to run itself. If a cell divides, it undergoes mitosis, and it doesn't give each of those 2 daughter cells a full set of instructions, we've got a problem. Because now we have cells that don't know how to run themselves. They don't have full sets of info. So when we look at what's going on with our DNA through cell division, we're going to be looking at, okay, how do we make copies of every piece of info? And how do we divide those pieces of info perfectly so we're giving a full set to each? So that's why we're going to talk a lot about DNA in this. So the first thing we need to know, because we're going to talk about human division, cell division, and then kind of relate this generally to the process that goes on in other cells, is looking at human organization. So every human body is going to have, so let's see if you guys know, how many pairs of chromosomes do we have? Yeah, so we have 23 pairs. Now you're going to get one of those from mom and one of those from dad. Now, some people tend to say, well, I look more like my mom, so I got more DNA from my mom, or I look more like my dad, I got more DNA from my dad. Nah. You got 50% from each. However, you may just be using certain information that makes you look a little bit more like your mom. So you may be using more information from one parent than the other, which is why we see some of those features come out a little bit more. But you are 50% mom, 50% dad.